Vivid verses.
The coffee maker finished its cycle at 6:47, same as every morning, and I pour my first cup standing at the kitchen counter while she slept down the hall. I had known since 5:12. That was when the security alert had come through on my phone, a quiet little notification that most people would have dismissed as routine, a flag from the access monitoring software I'd installed on the company's shared drive 6 weeks earlier, when a different kind of suspicion had nudged me into a different kind of preparation. Not suspicion of her, specifically. Not then. Just the generalized instinct of a man who has built things carefully enough to understand what it looks like when something begins to quietly come apart. The alert told me that a user account, mine technically because she'd asked to borrow my login 2 months ago to access a project brief she claimed she couldn't read from her own credentials, had downloaded 412 files between 9:18 and 11:44 the previous evening. Thursday evening, while I had been at a strategy dinner across town, she had been at home on my laptop in my accounts, pulling down everything she could carry. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and lay there in the dark for approximately 11 minutes. I know it was 11 minutes because I watched the clock. I wasn't devastated. I was thinking. There's an important difference, and I have always been better at thinking than at being devastated. By 5:23, I had a clear sense of the shape of it. She had access to proprietary research, 3 years of market analysis that had cost my firm close to $400,000 to compile. She had client data, contact sheets, engagement histories, the kind of granular relationship intelligence that takes a decade to build and about 40 minutes to download. She had internal strategy documents that would be worth something to exactly two kinds of people: competitors and journalists looking for a particular flavor of story. She had not done this casually. 412 files is not an accident. 412 files across a 2-hour window, sorted and targeted. That's a list. That's preparation. That's someone who thought about it before she did it, which meant she had been thinking about it while we were having dinner last Tuesday, while we were watching something forgettable on the couch last weekend, possibly while she was laughing at something I said. I'll let that sit for a moment, the way you let a burn sit before you decide how serious it is. Then I picked up my phone and sent a message to my attorney. Gregory picked up on the second ring, which told me he'd been awake, which told me he understood what a 5:30 text from me meant. I gave him the facts without editorializing. Download log, file categories, approximate value, the borrowed login, the timeline. He asked 4 questions. I answered them. He said he'd have paperwork drafted before noon. Emergency injunction, he said. We could get it filed today. Freeze her ability to deploy any of it before she has a chance to make contact with whoever she's planning to sell it to, if that's the play. I don't know yet what the play is, I said, but I'd rather be ready for the worst version. Smart. I'll call Judge Moreau's clerk at 8. I thanked him and hung up. Then I stood in the kitchen, in the silence of an ordinary Friday morning, and drank my coffee and looked out the window at the backyard she had helped me plant last spring. The hydrangeas along the back fence were her suggestion. She'd spent a Saturday afternoon out there in old clothes with dirt on her elbows, genuinely pleased with herself, and I had watched from the back door with something that felt uncomplicated and good. I noted the memory, filed it, moved on. This is what most people get wrong about moments like this one. They treat the discovery of betrayal as the moment everything changes. It doesn't. Everything changed when she made the decision, whenever that was, a week ago, a month ago, perhaps longer. My discovering it is just me catching up to a reality that was already true. Getting angry about it, or sad, or desperate would be like grieving a death that happened before you arrived at the hospital. The work to be done is not emotional. The work to be done is practical, and I'm very good at practical. She appeared in the kitchen at 7:20, barefoot, in the oversized linen shirt she slept in. Her hair was loose. She looked easy in the way that people look when they believe they are safe. "Morning," she said, and reached past me for a mug. "Morning," I said. She poured her coffee and leaned against the counter beside me, and we stood there the way we had stood together dozens of mornings. And I looked at her profile, the small nose, the particular way she held her mug with both hands, and I felt nothing that complicated. A kind of quiet, factual sadness, the way you feel when a favorite restaurant closes. Something good is gone. The mechanics of how it got gone are simply what they are. She talked about her plans for the day. I listened, asked one question at an appropriate moment, and said I had calls in the afternoon. She didn't flinch. She finished her coffee, kissed me on the cheek, and went to shower. The kiss felt like a data point. She wasn't nervous. She thought she had time. I made a second cup of coffee and thought about that. I left before she was done in the bathroom, which was normal enough that it wouldn't register. In my car, I called Gregory back. He'd already spoken to his paralegal and had a preliminary draft of the injunction. I drove to his office, and we sat across from each other at his conference table for 2 hours and went through it with the precision that expensive situations require. The injunction was narrow and airtight. It specifically restrained the unauthorized use, distribution, sale, or disclosure of any proprietary files accessed via my account credentials between the hours of 9 p.m. and midnight on the previous Thursday. It named her. It named the file categories. It cited the specific statutes: trade secret misappropriation, unauthorized computer access, breach of confidentiality. She'll have received the cease and desist by this evening, Gregory said. Good. Do you want to discuss the relationship angle? There may be. No. He looked at me. She's a private individual, I said. Not a business partner, not an employee. We treat it like what it is: unauthorized access to proprietary systems. The personal history is irrelevant to the legal question. Gregory nodded slowly. He'd known me long enough not to push. And personal communication? Through you, if there needs to be any. Understood. I drove back across town in early afternoon traffic, and I thought, as I often do when I have nothing specific to occupy my hands, about the geometry of situations. She had taken the files on Thursday evening, which told me she had a destination for them. Something scheduled, someone expecting delivery, a transaction with a timeline. The injunction would land on her doorstep and freeze that timeline completely. She would not be able to do anything with what she had without triggering the legal consequences I had just filed into motion. Whatever leverage she imagined she was holding would evaporate not gradually, but immediately, the way a card house goes. All at once, no partial collapses. She would call me. That was certain. The question was when and what tone she would use. I had no interest in the conversation. Not out of cruelty. I want to be clear about that, at least to myself, but because there was genuinely nothing she could say that would change the material facts, and material facts were all I was operating on. An apology would not unfile the injunction. An explanation would not recluse the 412 files. An accusation, you were cold, you were distant, you never really let me in, would be psychologically interesting perhaps, but legally and practically meaningless. The cleanest thing, the kindest thing in the only way I understand kindness, was to let the paperwork speak and say nothing myself. She called at 6:43 in the evening, which I calculated was approximately 40 minutes after the process server would have reached her. I watched my phone illuminate on the kitchen counter, and I let it ring through. I was not at home. I was at a restaurant 2 miles away, at a small corner table, eating alone. I had ordered the sea base. The restaurant was quiet on Fridays in the early evening before the dinner crowd arrived, which was exactly why I'd chosen it. A man eating alone at a small table in a quiet restaurant is no one's emergency. She called again at 6:51, 6:58, 7:04, 7:09. I finished my dinner. I had a glass of wine, a white burgundy I'd been meaning to try for several months, and which turned out to be excellent, with that particular mineral quality that good burgundy achieves when the vintage has been right. I noted this also. Mundane pleasures persist through extraordinary circumstances, and I find something grounding about that. She called at 7:22, then again at 7:40. I paid the bill and drove home. The apartment felt different when I walked in, the way any space feels different when you understand that someone has misused it. She had a key. I had already arranged with building management to have the lock recoded on Saturday morning. Her things were still here, her books on the lower shelves, her candles on the bathroom windowsill, a silk scarf folded over the back of the bedroom chair, and I looked at them with the detached attention of someone completing an inventory. Not hostile, just accurate. She called again at 8:15 while I was changing my shirt. I declined it manually that time, which felt like the appropriate punctuation. Gregory had told me that she might attempt to reach out through intermediaries. Mutual friends, perhaps. A younger woman I'd met through her, Cassie, who had always seemed genuinely warm and not party to anything. She called at 8:49, and I answered that one. "Hey," she said, uncertain the way someone sounds when they've been asked to make a call they didn't fully volunteer for. "This is awkward, but are you okay? She's trying to reach you." "I know," I said. "I appreciate you calling. There's a legal matter involved, so I'm not in a position to be in contact right now." "That's not a reflection of anything on your end." A pause. "Okay. Yeah. Should I tell her anything? She can reach my attorney if there's something that needs to be said." Another pause, longer. "Okay," she said, and I could hear in her voice that she had started to understand the shape of it, even without the specifics. "Take care of yourself." "You too." I hung up and sat on the edge of the bed for a moment in the quiet. There was one more call I was expecting, and it came at 9:03. A number I recognized as belonging to a man named Foster, who had been introduced to me at a dinner party several months ago as a consultant in market research. I had thought nothing of him at the time. I thought quite a lot about him now. I'll let that one ring too. The fact that he called at all was, in its way, useful information. It told me the pipeline had been active. It told me Gregory had moved fast enough to interrupt something real. I texted Gregory the number and the timestamp and left it with him. Saturday unfolded with an administrative precision that I found genuinely satisfying. The lock was recoded at 9 a.m. as arranged. I had packed her things, the books, the candles, the scarf, the half-dozen items in the bathroom cabinet, the set of earrings she kept in a small ceramic dish on my dresser, into 2 clean boxes, and left them with the building's front desk with instructions to hold them for her retrieval. I included no note. There was no note that would have improved on the silence. Gregory called at 11. "She reached out through a lawyer," he said. "Which one?" "Someone at a small firm on the east side. Junior associate, essentially. The communication is exploratory, fishing to understand what we have." "What did you tell them?" "That we have everything we need, and that the filing speaks for itself." "Good. She may be positioning for a negotiation." Her attorney used the word context. There isn't any context that changes what the files are. Agreed. I just want you to be prepared for the possibility that she'll try to make this into a conversation about the relationship. Frame the data theft as something more sympathetic, an impulse, an accident, a misunderstanding. I thought about this for a moment. 412 files, sorted and targeted, across a 2-hour window, on a night she knew I was out. "Let her frame it however she wants," I said. "The download log doesn't have a feelings column." Gregory laughed, which was rare enough to be notable. "No," he said, "it doesn't." "What's the actual exposure on her end?" "Significant, if we go criminal. And I'm not recommending that at this stage. We could pursue it under the computer fraud statute. Civilly, we've got a strong trade secret claim." The unauthorized access alone is straightforward. The question is what you want out of this. This was the question I had been considering since Friday morning, and I had a clear answer. I want the files back, provably destroyed. I want a legal record that they were improperly accessed. I want a settlement that includes a confidentiality clause and a non-disclosure that runs forward. I don't want a public fight. That's achievable, Gregory said. It'll take some time. I have time. He paused. And personally, already done. It's done, Gregory. That part doesn't require any further process. There was a pause on the line, the kind that happens when someone decides not to ask the question they almost asked. Understood, he said. I'll go back to her attorney with the framework. I had a call with my operations team at 2 in the afternoon, a standing weekend call I keep during crunch periods, and I handled it with full attention. The data breach had implications for how we managed access protocols going forward, and I raised them with my IT lead directly, framing it as a systemic audit rather than a specific incident. He took notes. We scheduled a full review for the following week. Afterward, I went for a long walk. This is something I do when I need to process without forcing it. The neighborhood is good for walking. Older streets with good trees, the kind of sidewalks that have been heaved up by roots over decades and then patched imperfectly, which makes you watch where you step and keeps you grounded in the physical fact of forward movement. I thought about the first time I had met her at a dinner party hosted by a couple I liked. Long table, good wine, the comfortable noise of a group of people who mostly knew each other. She had been across the table and 2 seats down, and she had said something sharp and funny about a documentary everyone had apparently seen and I hadn't. And I had thought, there's someone worth talking to. There are moments. There are always moments with any person who matters at all. A weekend trip where everything landed right. The evening she sat beside me on the back patio while I worked through a problem out loud, and she didn't try to fix it, just listened and asked one precise question that unlocked something. The way she cooked, not particularly well, but with a kind of inventive confidence that meant it was always interesting. I did not try to make those moments not count. What I have learned over time is that good moments and good character are not the same thing. A person can be genuinely wonderful in many contexts and still be capable of a particular kind of betrayal. The two coexist. It's uncomfortable, but it's accurate. She had turned intimacy into leverage. That was the specific thing. She had looked at the trust that accumulates in shared life, the borrowed password, the unguarded laptop, the access that comes from closeness, and made a calculation. Whatever the calculation was exactly, whether it was financial desperation or ambition or grievance or simple opportunism, she had looked at what we were to each other and used it as a tool. When I think about that too directly, I feel something. Not rage. More like the feeling of stepping onto a surface you believed was solid and finding it isn't. A lurch. The recalibration of understanding what was real. And then I think the recalibration is the work. Do the work. I walked for an hour and 15 minutes and came home feeling clear. She appeared on Sunday. I had anticipated this, though I had not been certain of the timing. She didn't have a key anymore, so she couldn't come up to the apartment, and I assumed she knew that the boxes had been left at the desk because the building manager would have called her when she sent someone to retrieve them. But she came herself, I learned, because the front desk called me at 11 in the morning to let me know she was asking to be let up. Please tell her that won't be possible, I said, and that if she'd like to communicate, she can do so through the attorney of record. A brief silence on the line. Of course, Mr. Hale. I set the phone down and stood in my kitchen and thought about her standing at the lobby desk below me. What she was wearing, what expression she had on, whether she had rehearsed what she planned to say. She appeared on Sunday. I had anticipated this, though I had not been certain of the timing. She didn't have a key anymore, so she couldn't come up to the apartment, and I assumed she knew that the boxes had been left at the desk because the building manager would have called her when she sent someone to retrieve them. But she came herself, I learned, because the front desk called me at 11 in the morning to let me know she was asking to be let up. "Please tell her that won't be possible," I said, "and that if she'd like to communicate, she can do so through the attorney of record." A brief silence on the line. "Of course, Mr. Hale." I set the phone down and stood in my kitchen and thought about her standing at the lobby desk below me. What she was wearing, what expression she had on, whether she had rehearsed what she planned to say. There's a particular kind of moment that arrives in the aftermath of betrayal. I've heard people describe it as the moment you want to have it out, to sit across from the person and hear them explain themselves, to watch them account for it in real time. I understand the impulse. Explanations feel like closure, but I've never found them actually useful. What they usually are is an opportunity for the other person to say something that makes you doubt your own understanding of the facts, or to say something so inadequate that you feel worse. Neither outcome was something I needed. The facts were, she had done it. I knew she had done it. She knew I knew. Everything else was theater. I heard nothing further from the front desk, which meant she had left. Gregory called Monday afternoon with an update. "Her attorney has come back with an opening position," he said. "They're contesting the characterization. They want to argue that because the login was shared consensually, there's an ambiguity around what constitutes unauthorized access." I'd anticipated this argument. It was the only one available to her. And it's weak. Consensual sharing of a login for a specific limited purpose, accessing a single project brief, does not constitute blanket authorization to download 400 files of proprietary data. Consent is not open-ended. We'll brief that clearly. What else? She's offering a voluntary return of the files and a personal apology in exchange for us dropping the injunction and not pursuing further action. I considered this. The apology isn't a term. Tell them we'll accept return and verified destruction of the files plus the formal settlement I outlined. The confidentiality provisions, the non-disclosure going forward. No apology clause. That's not a legal term. It's just noise. You don't want the apology. What would I do with it? Gregory paused. Then, there's also, he stopped. Go ahead. She's indicated, through her attorney, that she would like the opportunity for a personal conversation. Not a legal negotiation. A conversation. I sat with this for approximately 4 seconds. No. She seems to feel that there are things that weren't said. Gregory. I kept my voice even. I'm sure there are things that weren't said. There are always things that weren't said. That doesn't change what was done. Tell her attorney that my position on personal communication is unchanged, and that if she'd like to resolve the legal matter, I'm prepared to do that efficiently and without antagonism. But the relationship question is already resolved. All right, he said. I'll convey that. Thank you. After I hung up, I sat for a moment in my chair by the window. Outside, the afternoon was doing what autumn afternoons do here. Light going golden and sideways, shadows getting long early. I watched it for a moment. I thought about what she might want to say. I could construct several versions of it. The version where she was desperate, where something had happened that she felt justified the decision. The version where she was angry, where the conversation was about me, my absences, my distances, whatever catalog of grievances had accumulated. The version where she was simply sorry, genuinely and without strategy, because regret is real even in people who have made bad decisions. None of these versions changed anything. This is the part that most people find difficult to accept. I think that understanding someone's reasons doesn't obligate you to absorb the consequences. You can have complete compassion for why a person did a thing and still decline to be the surface on which they work it out. These are not contradictory positions. I wish her no harm. I wanted her life to continue without legal catastrophe, which was why I had chosen settlement over prosecution. I wanted in some uncomplicated sense, for her to eventually be all right. But I was not the person who could give her what she was reaching for, because what she was reaching for was absolution for me, and I wasn't the right source for that. That's between her and her own accounting. The settlement took 11 days to finalize. The files were returned and certified destroyed by a third-party data firm. The agreement was signed. The confidentiality provisions ran in both directions, which was appropriate, and the non-disclosure covered all proprietary materials going forward. Her attorney had pushed back twice on specific language, and we had adjusted once and held firm once, and ultimately it came to terms that I considered fair. Gregory sent me the executed documents on a Thursday evening, which was, I noticed, exactly 2 weeks after she had made her decision on a Thursday evening that started all of this. The symmetry was coincidental, but I noted it anyway. I read through the executed documents once, carefully, the way I read everything. Then I saved them to a secure folder and closed my laptop. My apartment was quiet. It had been quiet for 11 days, a different quality of quiet than the kind that exists between two people who share a space, and I had been paying attention to the difference, not dramatizing it, just observing it with the same attention I give to anything I need to understand. It was manageable. There's something people say about loneliness after the end of something, about how the absence of a person is louder than silence. I've heard this said, and I think I understand what they mean, but I have also always found that I have enough interior life to furnish a room. I can sit in a quiet apartment and not feel that the quiet is catastrophic. I find my own company reasonably good. The hydrangeas along the back fence at my previous house. No, that's not quite right. I don't have a back fence. She suggested the hydrangeas for a friend's garden. I was misremembering. The detail doesn't matter. What I was reaching for was this. There are things she brought into my life that were genuinely good, and some of them will leave with her, and some of them have already become mine in a way that persists. This is how it goes. You don't need to be intact from the beginning to end up intact at the end. You need to keep moving with accuracy. I made dinner. Something simple. Pasta with olive oil and garlic and things I had in the refrigerator, nothing elaborate. I ate at the kitchen counter, standing because I felt like it, because there was no longer any negotiation about where or how or with what level of ceremony dinner happened. I put on music I liked. I thought about the project on my desk that I'd been neglecting. I thought about calling a friend I hadn't spoken to in a while. I thought about the white burgundy I'd had at that restaurant on Friday evening and made a note to look up the producer. These are not the thoughts of a man in ruins. I rinsed my plate and stood for a moment by the kitchen window, looking at the street below. People walking their dogs. A couple sharing something they were looking at on one of their phones. A woman running with the focused, blank expression of someone hitting her pace. I had done what needed doing. Decisively, without cruelty, without theater. The legal matter was closed. The personal matter had resolved itself the moment she made her decision, because that was when it ended, not when I filed the injunction, not when the boxes went to the front desk, not when she stood in the lobby and the front desk called upstairs. It ended on a Thursday evening when she sat at my laptop and made a choice. Everything that followed was just me catching up. I turned off the kitchen light and went to read. 3 weeks after the settlement closed, I ran into Cassie at a coffee shop I go to on Saturday mornings. Small place, 6 tables, good beans, the kind of place where you sometimes nod at regulars without knowing their names. She was at a corner table with a book, and she looked up when I came in, and there was a half second where I could see her calculating whether to acknowledge me, which was reasonable. I went over. It would have been stranger not to. "Hey," she said. "Hey." I gestured at the chair across from her. 2 minutes if you have them. She nodded, and I sat. "I want to be clear about one thing," I said, keeping my voice low and without any particular weight to it. "None of this is about you, and I don't expect you to be in the middle of it. If she's a good friend to you, that's what matters. Cassie looked at me for a moment. She had the kind of face that shows what it's thinking, which I had always appreciated. Can I ask you something? Sure. Did you know? Before it happened, that something was wrong. I thought about this honestly. I knew something had shifted. I didn't know what. She nodded slowly. I always thought you two were solid. So did I said. And then we weren't. She looked at her coffee cup. She's not great, she said carefully. For what it's worth. She'll be all right, I said. It'll take some time. Something moved across Cassie's face then. A little surprised, I thought, maybe by the lack of satisfaction in my voice. I wasn't performing magnanimity. I meant it simply. It would take some time, and then she would be all right. And that was an accurate prediction about someone with intelligence and resources and a life that didn't begin and end with what had happened between us. I stood up. Take care of yourself. You too, she said. I got my coffee and sat at a table by the window and read for an hour, and no one bothered me, and the morning light came in at the angle it comes in at that time of year, and the coffee was good. This is how it ends. Not with confrontation, not with resolution of the emotional kind, not with any speech that clarifies what went wrong or assigns the appropriate degree of blame. It ends quietly, in an ordinary place, with ordinary light, with the accumulated fact of decisions made and consequences followed, and a life that continues with more information than it had before. She had believed love would insulate her from consequences. It's an old mistake, and she isn't the first person to make it, and she won't be the last. The error is in the framing, the idea that feeling something deeply means the ordinary laws of conduct are suspended, that intimacy creates a zone of exception. It doesn't. If anything, intimacy raises the stakes of those laws, because intimacy means you know what something is worth to the other person, which means any violation is not ignorant, but deliberate. I don't say this with anger. I observe it the way you observe anything true and a little sad. I finished my coffee. I went home through the familiar streets, past the familiar landmarks, the coffee shop giving way to the hardware store, giving way to the old apartment building with the blue door and the tree out front that goes spectacular in October. The work on my desk was waiting. My life was waiting, the ongoing, ordinary, extraordinary fact of it. I went inside. I got to it.
Thanks for listening.